Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well tonight. Welcome to another show about psychology. I won't have to get drunk tonight. How about that? That's always a good thing. Last time we talked about personality and personality testing, and we kind of realized that it's a nebulous topic. One of the things I want to point out is on personality, everything is a sliding scale. It's a gradient of behavior and feelings. Okay, so we're gonna talk about that again here as well, because some of the things we'll talk about can seem okay at one point and not okay at another. It's that gradient. It's where that you are in that spectrum where things go badly for you. So, yeah, we're going to talk about that a lot tonight. Abnormal psychology implies that there is such a thing as a normal psychology. And that is where the problem comes in many times. So we try to use reality as a measuring stick, and Donna is telling me something here. Up my volume, okay? Sorry about that. Is that better? Thank you. So as we go along here, we're going to look at normality versus abnormality and see if that helps us define some things here. Some things you will see on the gradient that are on the spectrum that are way abnormal, and everyone would say that those are abnormal. Other things you might say, well, that doesn't seem so wild to me. So, you're gonna find a spot here. Now, psychologists will say that abnormal behavior is a psychological dysfunction that involves your thinking or your feeling, so it's cognitive and emotional, and it could be behavioral. Okay, so you've got these different issues that come into play when you're talking about what's abnormal. It should also be something that causes distress or impairment in your functioning. So something you used to be able to do and you can't do now because of this impairment. Okay? And that could be an impairment cognitively, emotionally, or behaviorally. And it is not a culturally expected or accepted behavior. That's where we run into problems. Okay? Cultures are different. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go along. As a counselor, I always looked at first, what's the presenting problem the person's coming in with? What are they saying is wrong? That's great if the person says, hey, I'm coming in here because I have problems with this. Although sometimes you'll have people that are brought in by other people, family members or friends that say, Jack here really needs to get his act together. He's got some problems. And he may or may not realize the severity of it. It's not that bad. Really, it's not a problem for me. Well, it's a problem for your friends. So that could be an issue. Also, a person could be referred through a legality. So they need to get treatment to overcome something, such as a person who's sent because of alcoholism might be sent by a legal authority to say, hey, it's either this or jail. They might also be sent in by some sort of funding agency. When I worked as a counselor, I was sent people from Social Security. They'd say, here's somebody maybe you should take a look at. a lot of those folks are not going to be very as cooperative as somebody who comes in presenting the problem themselves. So you got to take some caution, in defining these problems. Also, sometimes the presenting problem isn't all of the problem. And as you go further in, you find other issues that might be happening. So, some things just hide behind other problems. Okay? But again, real world is a measuring stick. We'll have to see, okay, how does this affect you in your real life? Okay? Is it a problem? Is it not? Okay. Some things we look at are going to be looked at on a scale of, is it a general thing or a specific thing? So if a person comes in and they say, I'm going to do this speech or this YouTube show, and I'm nervous about that. Or, something else is going to happen, and I'm very nervous about that. That's a very specific cause to that anxiety the person's having. Whereas another person might come in and say, I am nervous all the time. Everything seems to make me nervous. I don't know what it is. Anything, even coming here today was an anxiety for me. That's more general anxiety. And that might be harder to work with. So that is also that general versus specific is going to come up again as we talk about some of the other issues that people might have. And we're going to go into specific issues. It's going to be fun tonight. Okay, why do we want to label anyway? Why do we have to diagnose and give a label anyway? I mean, why? Well, one could be funding, okay? Perhaps a person is applying for disability and they want to, Social Security might want to weed out, is this person really got a disability or is this malingering? What's going on here? So there might be a funding issue there. Where I worked, we had to figure out a diagnosis because otherwise we could not work with that person. So the funding was to pay for the counseling. So if a person came in, they said, I'm having problems, but we couldn't narrow it down to say, okay, what are the problems what's going on? And we don't have a diagnosis. We don't get the funding to help that person. They may need to go to a special class. They may need a special treatment, and they will not get it if they don't have a diagnosis that fits that particular treatment or that particular plan. It also will help, the diagnosis will help in determining what kind of treatment we're going to help a person get, because you don't want to give the wrong therapy to a person, no matter whether it's, medications or, talk therapy or, some more involved types of therapy. You don't want to do the wrong one. You will not only not help the person, but you might make things worse. So diagnosis helps in there. And third, people just like to label other people. And that's a danger that we run into. One of the things that you'll probably get out of tonight and probably next week too, is you'll hear certain problems or ailments brought up and you'll think, I know somebody that fits that category. Be careful, please. We're already in a society where we're already pointing out people and going, that person's a narcissist. And we've got to be very careful when we're labeling people, because we don't want to get in trouble legally, but we also don't want to get in trouble by labeling a person and then they have to live with that label. And that can be a very difficult thing for people to do. So we try to be very careful about that. It bothers me sometimes when a person will go and see like a psychiatrist, and after 1 hour, they have a label, they have a diagnosis on them. And I don't know that you can really tell that much talking to a person one time for 1 hour or half an hour sometimes. They don't even get that. That kind of bugs me. If it's followed up with another treatment and another modality, like a psychiatrist says, okay, you've got some paranoia going on here. You need to go see this counselor, and you're referred somewhere else, and they will say, okay, I'll look at that diagnosis. And as I talk to that person, I find out, well, okay, they've got some paranoia, but they've also got some PTSD, and that's why they've got the paranoia. Okay, so as long as we're open to changing a label once it's on there, often I do not see that happen. A person's labeled, and that's what they are for the rest of their lives. And that can be unfortunate for people. So that's some of the things I wanted to kind of get out of the way first before we went over some of the other things. Yes, everything's it's an issue of degrees, okay? Now, a long time ago, like say in the Middle Ages, if you had a problem with your life, you might have been diagnosed as being possessed, okay? You might speak with demons and ghosts and things like that, and that's the source of your problem. You're possessed. And the treatment for that was not very effective. So as we've gone along, we've kind of gotten out of that and more into a medical model, thank goodness, because we learn as we go along. Now, there was another person who later said, well, I think that a lot of these madness that people have is caused by the moon. And that's where we come up with the term lunacy, or you're a lunatic, because the moon has affected you in a bad way. Well, we've moved on from that as well. Thank goodness. There's also something that can happen that isn't talked about a lot, but sometimes one person can have an issue and it can affect others. It's not like a psychological problem is contagious, not physically anyway, but mentally it can be. There was a pair of sisters who were separated not at birth, but soon after. They were little girls. They were separated and raised on different continents. One was in the U.S. and one was in Norway, I believe. And they decided they were going to meet, and they met in England. Not quite halfway, but there is, halfway would have been in the ocean. So they met in England, and one of the sisters was very disturbed, and it wasn't long before the other sister started mimicking her behaviors and started acting like her, and it ended up that one of them ran onto one of the major highways in Britain and nearly got hit by a car. And then the other sister, on seeing that, even though police were trying to hold her back, she ran into the street too. Not to help the sister, she ran a different direction. It was just like, okay. And they call this folie à deux, is the French. And it's the folly of pairs. Okay, Trey, thank you. Trey has seen the video of the sisters. Yes, it was very terrifying because neither one of them really could explain what happened. And I think they figured out that the daughter, or the lady that was raised in the U.S., was the first one to have the problem. It was some sort of paranoia, okay? And the other sister from Norway developed it after, just a couple of hours of being with the other sister. It's like really weird. But when you think about other instances, some problems have passed from one person to another, to another, to another. And this is a much more dangerous type of thing for everyone. Not only the people involved, but the people who might get involved, the people that might be affected by it. In the Middle Ages, there was something called St. Vitus dance. It happened in several cities, mostly in Germany and I believe some in France. One person just was dancing in the street. And this person just had to dance, and nobody could stop her from dancing. And then somebody else started dancing, and okay, there's the Folie à Deux. Well, it spread, and more people started in the dancing fever. And as it carried through, I mean, they would have like 100 people dancing uncontrollably. Some of them would pass out or just lay down on the ground for a while, and then they'd get back up and start dancing again. After one of them, I think, passed away, they started to think, we got to do something about this. Someone had the bright idea, well, they're dancing, let's play music. And maybe when the music stops, they'll all stop dancing. Well, that didn't go too well because it added more people to the dancing. So, they finally figured out a way to take them up this hill to this one particular church. And it was a church to St. Vitus. And so the priest there did a little ceremony for them while they're dancing in the church. And some of them, that was enough. It snapped them out of it somehow. And so that's how it started to be called St. Vitus Dance. Yes, we call it now, today we call it mass hysteria. That's right, Dan. It also has happened in other places where in Africa, there was a girl that started giggling in her class. And, that happens, Well, another girl starts giggling. Pretty soon, the whole class is giggling, and they can't stop. They just can't. They're just laughing and giggling, and it would pass to another class in the same school, and they're like, okay, everybody, we got to shut down school, which is good. Separate these kids, and maybe they'll stop giggling. Most of them did once they were separated. It was almost like a new normality had formed for these students. The trouble was that other cities and other schools started having the same thing happen. So they call that the giggling plague. And it just finally wore itself out. People stopped doing it. So not everything can be easily explained by the science. We try. We have certain methods we might try, but sometimes all you can do is play music or take them to church and, hopefully that'll blow over or separate them, close down class. So those things are scary to psychologists when those happen. If at any time tonight I use the terms insanity, I'm wrong, okay? Insanity is really not a psychological term. That is a legal term. You can be found insane and not able to stand trial, perhaps, or you can be found guilty by reason of insanity, okay? And there used to be a hospital in England called Bedlam Hospital. You probably heard of Bedlam before. And what could happen is, if you, like, say, robbed somebody, and you said, I don't know what came over me. It was, I think I have a mental problem. I think I was insane. Okay? If they found that maybe you couldn't stand trial because you were insane, instead of sending you to prison, they'd send you to Bedlam. From what happened in Bedlam, you might have been better off going to prison. Okay? Yes, Puppet History did a great episode on the Dancing Fever. They really did. Billy Bedlam. I don't know that. It must be a specific person. Okay, maybe Thesis will explain that in our chat. But yeah, people would have been better off going to prison than going to Bedlam. Because in prison, you might be given hard labor, but you had rights of sorts. And eventually, after your sentence was done, you got released. Very few people got released from Bedlam. You were insane, and maybe, if you were lucky, somebody would come by and say, I think you could probably stand trial now. But you could be held at what they called at Her Majesty's discretion. Or at His Majesty's discretion, depending on what era it was. And when that happens, that means that basically the government can hold you as long as they want. And that also has happened in the States. If a person is found not guilty for reason of insanity, they will probably be sent to a mental hospital. And they may or may not be better off than if they had just gone to prison. So anyway, we don't use the term insanity very often in psychology. And if we do, it's just because we slip, because we're people, we make mistakes. And I might slip tonight. So you can catch me in the chat and say, hey, no, don't use that word. Okay? Psychologists would rather speak of pathology or deviance. And those are loaded terms somewhat, but we're going to talk about that. It's my theory that you cannot be deviant by yourself. If you're on a boat sinks, you swim to this island, and there's nobody else living on the island. Are you deviant? No, you're the only person there. You're the only social structure there. So whatever you do is normal while you're on that island. If you get a second person that swims up, they're both going to look at each other and say, oh, he's deviant. No, she's deviant. No, he's deviant. No, she's deviant. Okay. It's only when we get enough people together that agree to what's normal that we can actually statistically say there's a deviance, okay? Dan has pointed out that Jack the Ripper, one of the Jack the Ripper suspects was sent to Bedlam. After a few years, he figured out how to escape. Okay. Oh, okay. Donna's pointing out something in the chat about an actor. Okay. So there's different models that we might look at to describe deviance. One is statistical. Remember that bell curve we talked about in intelligence? Yeah. What do 78% of the people consider normal? The other people on the outskirts of that are abnormal in their behavior, their thoughts, whatever. Okay. You can look at it that way. And that is taken into consideration. Another is discomfort. If something's really bothering you or bothering everybody else, that can be a factor. And deviance from the norm plus non-adaptive behavior. Okay, if you're doing something that is not helping your life, then that's non-adaptive behavior. It's not helping you to carry on and live a happy life. So that is also part of the factors that we look at when we're trying to look at, is something deviant. There's also a social definition of abnormality. I don't think there are many behaviors. There's a few, but there aren't many behaviors that are seen everywhere as crazy, if you want to use that term, unless they hurt the individual, hurt the group that they live in, or they hurt society in general, okay? The potential breeding of the group. So, but some of these are even sanctioned by governments or religions, such as, what about chastity? Okay, if a person says, nope, no sex for me, I'm fine, is that normal or abnormal? Well, statistically, it would be considered abnormal. Okay? But in certain circumstances, in certain social groups, let's say you're a member of the Catholic clergy, you're a priest or you're a nun, and you someday maybe want to be pope, but no, don't be sleeping around. That would be normal within that particular social group. Some might even say, okay, getting a vasectomy is abnormal, in which case I'm abnormal. Wish you all knew, probably anyway. But, that cuts down the possible breeding of the human race if I'm not helping. So is that normal? Abnormal? Well, statistically also might be abnormal. So, what's deviant from the norm is defined by who is defining first. Okay? So, some groups will say, you're abnormal, and you're going, okay, where do you come up with that? Well, that's not the way we think. So they would define that as abnormal or deviant. It also depends on when that definition was made in history. For the longest time, having a different sexual preference was seen as deviant. So, homosexuality was seen as a disease for many, many years, even in the psychological community. And it has only recently, with changing societal norms, has changed to be not seen as a deviance. We'll come back to that later, too. And also when the definition is applied to that person's life, in that person's life. I was called in on one case where the parents were very worried about their daughter. It turns out that this girl had set a fire in the house. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, let's go find out what this is all about. Turns out she hadn't set a fire in the... Well, she had set a fire, okay? She had a metal wastebasket, and she put an album cover in there and burned it. That's all she burned, is the album cover. And then so, Counselor Brain going, okay, I got to talk to this girl. Found out that artist, that singer or that performer, was her heartthrob. He'd gotten married, horrible sin that is, in her eyes, anyway, and she no longer could aspire to be Mrs. Bobby Darin or whoever it was. she was so enamored of. And so she decided, I'm not going to listen to him anymore. She didn't burn the album, but she burnt the album cover. So, in talking with them, I was like, this is teenage behavior. So teenagers do weird crap. It doesn't mean she's insane or she's deviant. She's never not burned anything else. And so, you just got to look at what it is within that person's lifetime and where they are. Are they really young? Are they really old? Older people do crazy things too. So, you got to look at that. Yes, Dan, a form of closure for her. That's right. She was getting, Okay, here's some things I want to mention. And these are things that could be seen as deviant. Okay? And number one is probably going to get me in trouble with YouTube. But I'm going to say it anyway because this is a psychological show. We will talk about psychological problems. And I'm sorry, but people do attempt suicide. And that is often seen as deviant. Okay? But people with maybe long-term cancer, or maybe they've got some sort of a disease that cannot be cured, and they might want an assisted help, that might be acceptable to some. Okay? So, talking to yourself. We've all done it. You can confess. We've all done this. We've all talked to ourselves at one time or another, like, oh, that was dumb. It happens. If you talk to yourself all the time, it might be seen as deviant. So, like I say, there's these degrees that go on. Lying. People lie. Is it deviant? Well, it doesn't help other people much, so it could be seen as deviant. Beards. Beards could be seen as deviant by some people. Men with ponytails. Some people think that's deviant. Getting multiple body piercings. Some people would say that's pretty deviant. Some people would say, no, that's normal. I know a lot of people I know have body piercings. Okay, so it depends on who's doing the defining here. Talking with dead persons. Okay, now here's a gradient we've got to step on. Somebody who goes to the grave of their beloved and tells them about what's been happening in their life, and that's the only dead person they talk to, fairly acceptable. Okay? Most people wouldn't say, okay, that person's, deviant, lock them away. Whereas if you claim that you speak to dead people, I see dead people, that might be a problem. So, and that also depends on how your belief systems go. One thing that bothers a lot of people is what they call inappropriate gender behavior. You're not acting manly enough, or you're not acting girly enough, and some people have seen that as deviance. I don't know how many women were put in asylums for a while because they dared to talk back to their husbands in the 1800s. That could get you landed in a mental institution. So, yeah, that's a historical definition, and it has changed, thank goodness. So the things we have to look out for, like I say, we don't want any legal ramifications from labeling a person. So we got to look at that. We also don't want them to have legal ramifications because, once a person's labeled as paranoid, they might have a court case someday for something else. And that comes up and somebody says, well, he's been labeled as having paranoid schizophrenia. Oh, well, we don't want to listen to him then. What? His rights just disappeared. Okay. People who have an idea of what they'll call sin. That's a sin. Okay. But is it madness? Is it lunacy? Well, maybe not, annoyance, people digging through your garbage. Maybe they're digging for food. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they're digging in your garbage to get information about their latest conspiracy theory. Now, that would be a little wild. Okay, maybe we need to look at them. Those kind of things. So we want to be careful when we're labeling people, like I say. And nobody is the norm, okay? If you said, what is a normal person, that would be something that we constructed. Because nobody fits all these categories and is not weird in some way or another, okay? Everybody's got something. So we're gonna celebrate people's deviance tonight, okay? Yes, Foxy, if you don't obey your husband, you could have ended up in the psych ward because, hey, you'd have to be crazy not to agree with your husband, right? So, there's something that we use before we start into that. There's something we use called the DSM-5, and it's a big book, and it has I'm sure there's over 500 pages of that thing, and I would have one to show you, but it cost $170 to buy it. If I were part of a university or something like that, I could probably buy it for $120. I mean, it's a big book, but very expensive. They don't want everybody to have one. Psychologists are like this, okay? I think it's because people would probably sit around and go, ooh, let's look at page 12. I think that's your mom. And there would be trouble. So it's probably a good thing, but it is a very expensive book. It's very difficult to get. Not everybody can have one. I'm going to take a closer look at that page that I just showed you. It was a kind of a cheat sheet that someone put together. And this is looking at persistent depressive disorder, dysthymia. And basically, one of the things that the diagnostic, or the DSM does, is a diagnostic and statistical manual, okay? And it will say, okay, how do I know it's dysthymia that a person has and not major depression or not episodic depression? Okay, so we'll look at this and we'll say, well, okay, to be in this category, you can't have 2 years, it has to be over 2 years, okay? Okay, and it has to be, you have depression more days of those 2 years than you don't have it. So you can't be symptom-free for as much as 2 months, or else you can't fit in this category. And then you have to have a presence of at least 2 out of their 6 categories: poor appetite or overeating. Okay, there's our gradient. Insomnia or hypersomnia. That means sleeping all the time. Low energy or fatigue. Low self-esteem. Decreased concentration or difficulty making decisions. Or feelings of hopelessness, Helplessness too, probably, but feelings of hopelessness. And you have to have 2 of those. So you'd have to meet all 3 of those criteria for a psychiatrist to say, it's dysthymia. Dysthymia. I can't say that word. Sorry. So this whole book goes through this, and it has differential diagnoses as well. It'll say, okay, to tell the difference between persistent depressive disorder and major depression, this is how we'll tell the difference between these two. So those are very useful. And it will also give you, like I said, it's diagnostic and statistical manual. So it will tell you that, okay, depression happens a lot. Okay? And the percentage of people who are depressed in the population is, and it'll give you that number. If a person says, well, I've got multiple personalities, they'd say, that's pretty rare, buddy. You're going to have to give me more information than that. So we're going to have to look at some stuff here before we can give you that diagnosis. So the manual helps us with this. Things it doesn't help us with a lot of times are things that are just kind of weird. They don't really maybe cause too much problem, but they give you a weird feeling. One of those is Fernway. It's a nostalgia for a place you've never been. And anomia is a nostalgia for a time you've never known. So it's like, oh man, I wish I could have lived in the 40s. The 40s were great. I loved the 40s. But yeah, you didn't live in the 40s. Well, yeah, but I just, it makes my heart ache that I couldn't live in Paris in the 1940s. Okay. But those are not what I would consider psychological problems, unless that's all you think about. Okay? If it borders on obsession, then okay, we're going to see those problems. So those things are just weird, but they're not diagnosable. Okay? 3 major divisions that we have in psychology. And tonight we're going to talk about problems in living, just normal everyday problems. Next we'll talk about what I call neuroses. They've changed the name of it. They call it something else now, but I'm going by what I used to call them because that's what the notes say, and it helps me to keep them straight in my head. So, neuroses. And then the third is psychosis. Those are the worst. And those are the 3 categories that we look at. Most of the people I dealt with would be in the problems in living category, although I've dealt with neurotic people before, and I've dealt with people with psychosis before. Those can be scary situations. And I'll tell you some of those scary situations. You can see why the beard is white. Problems in living. One of the problems is an adjustment disorder. Now, this can be something due to minor trauma, feelings of grief, feelings of extreme guilt, extreme marital issues could probably fit in that category. Substance abuse. At one time, sexual orientation was listed in here, but now it is, we only will see somebody and call it a problem or a deviance if it is a problem adjusting to your sexual preference. So let's say you're in a strict religious setting and you say, well, I think I might be gay, but that bothers me because that's wrong. And so you might seek help for that to determine what you want to do with that and how you can make yourself feel a little better about how you feel. So that's how we would deal with sexual orientation. In the past, they used to try to change your sexual orientation through therapy, called conversion therapy. And it was a nasty type of therapy as well. You say, okay, you come in and you're a man and you say you like other men, then we're going to show you pictures of attractive men and then give you a shock. Yes, they did that. So we've come a long way, people. We really have come a long way. Okay, thank you, Foxy. But they wouldn't carry this one because it's not really a college book exactly. they're really trying to hit it with the professionals on this. And I only had access to one because my work bought one, and I should have borrowed one, but I didn't. I was honest. I didn't take it because I don't need it now. But, they're handy to have sometimes, especially if you're teaching a course. So those are adjustment issues. A person might have problems adjusting to, having gotten divorced or having a trauma, or adjustment to, finding out, oh, my sexual orientation doesn't meet with my family standards. That might be, something you'd say, I'm going to have to adjust to this somehow. And so a counselor could help with those. And most of the time, except for the substance abuse, most of the time that's going to be something that a person comes in on their own. Self-referral, the best kind, in my opinion. Substance abuse, you might be sent by some legal entity or a family member. Okay. The next problem that a person might have in their normal everyday living their life are also have a physical portion to them as well. Okay, so something like we used to call it mental retardation. That's a bad term now. We now call it developmental delay. So if a person has a developmental delay, they might be sent in by a family member, and there is a physical cause to this. It might be chromosomal. It might be due to ingestion of those bad substances by mom while she was expecting. But there's a physical portion to it that needs to be dealt with as well as cognitive problems that might have to be helped along. I'm sorry, I just had a cat chase. Autism is another one that we're still trying to figure out what the physical cause is. But there are a lot of psychological adjustments that might need to be made, not only for the person with autism, but for parents as well, because dealing with an autistic child is not easy. And planning for their adulthood is almost harder. Okay, so if a person said, I need some counseling because of the autism, I would like to probably work with the entire family on that. Self-concept issues is an interesting one. Sometimes self-concept issues are like, you have a low self-esteem, and a counselor could help you try to build up that self-esteem. It could also be, there's a more advanced portion that probably fits more in the neurotic category, but where a person might have body dysmorphia. They might have been heavy at one time, they've lost a lot of weight. When they look in the mirror, they still see the heavy person. And they keep saying, no, I'm not skinny. Well, yes, you are. You're skinny now. No, I'm just a fat person pretending to be skinny. Okay, I think you need some help with that. Come see this guy I know. Okay, so that might be something that a person has to adjust to. But it's not really only in the adjustment category. It has a physical aspect as well. So we're going to have to deal with that. Okay. Personality disorders. Oh, those are fun. We'll talk about more of those later. Personality disorders are when, you remember I said the personality is on a gradient, on a spectrum? Well, yeah. When your personality is way out of whack in one category or another, you're going to have life problems, and you're going to need some help with those. Some of them might be easily remedied by helping the person change behaviors. we're not going to change your entire personality, probably, but we're going to teach you how to deal with that in a societal level. So you don't have problems with your family, friends, whatever. Another problem that has another physical issue with it is an organic brain disorder. This could be something like, if you don't have, if a person has syphilis, okay, and they don't get it treated, it will eventually destroy some brain cells, and they will have a somewhat like dementia-like symptoms. It's called paresis. And anytime I say these terms and you want to know like a spelling or more information about it, feel free to put it in chat or email me later or ask me if anyone sees me in person or online somewhere. Feel free to ask about these. But paresis is it causes problems like dementia, and some of it can be treated with medication, some of it can't. Some of them will need some counseling to have to deal with what damage has already been done, if we can fix it, those kind of things. Okay, these next two are very interesting, and counseling has been helpful in these two instances. It is probably due to a vitamin deficiency, so that's the physical part. And they will sound disgusting. I'm sorry, but I got to tell you about these. First one is pica. In pica, a person, that's P-I-C-A, a person will eat non-traditional, non-food items. Chalk, small bits of concrete, rocks, feathers. It can be very dangerous to that person. So we want them to get counseling as soon as possible with that. Even if they say, it's not a problem. I don't eat that many feathers. Let's go get some help. Okay. The other is trichotillomania. And that's a nice long one. Trichotillomania is when people will pull out their own hairs and chew on them, and sometimes eat and swallow hair. So it's kind of like pica. It's a very odd form of pica. I don't think I've ever heard of a case where a person ate other people's hair. It's only their own. Which is odd in itself, because if you have a vitamin deficiency and it will be in your hair as well, eating the hair really will not help you to overcome that issue. So I'm not sure where that helps a person. Okay? But in all of these, just a regular old counselor can help with those issues. Okay? And those that are in the physical problems with the psychological overlay, well, those we might work with a doctor to help a person, because they might, need some more help with that. Okay. That was all of the problems in living I wanted to talk about tonight. I'm sure I'll think of some more. Or you will think of some more. And like I say, feel free to add those in the chat, or, save them up for next time and put them in the chat then. But those are the easiest to work with. Okay? And like I say, most of these people will either be self-referral or they'll be brought in by a family member. As long as that person realizes what they're doing is a problem, there's a good chance that we can help. Yes, Foxy, there's plenty of abnormal out there. And like I say, nobody's actually normal. That's just a construct, a model we put together. Everybody has some problem somewhere on this list, and everybody's either had some sort of trauma or grief or guilt or marital issues or, all these kind of things, or low self-esteem. Everybody's had this. Right, Dan, we're all bozos on this bus. Exactly. So, if you saw yourself in one of those, think about talking to your friends, your family, saying, hey, do you think this is a problem? And if they say, no, like I say, talk to your family first. They may not see a problem. Then talk to your friends. Do you think I have a problem in this? If they say, yeah, maybe you could work on that, then, seek out help. If everybody agrees that it's okay for you to do that, then you're probably in the right group. Okay? And you're probably okay there. All right. Well, that's all I wanted to talk to you about tonight and bother you. Next week, we talk about neuroses, which are very interesting. And we might even recognize ourselves in a couple of those, too. Whee! What fun. So, I want to thank everybody for coming by, and have a good week.